welcome everybody to our model Seder here. I want you to know, and Rabbi and I are both going to do this together with you.
Can I say something quickly because I'm going to forget otherwise?
Sure.
We meant to have a card for you all with all of the upcoming adult education opportunities, and we don't. So if you are not a member of the synagogue, because if you're a member of the synagogue, you get the shofar, you get the e-news, you'll know whatever's going on. But if you're not a member of the synagogue and you would like to get information on the rest of our adult education classes, please give us your name, and however, if you want a postcard, your mailing address, if you want an email, your email address, and I'm going to leave this up here, but now I don't have to remember. Okay? I'm getting old.
No, that's good. And to all of you, how many of you have never been to a Seder? Okay, so this will be a first for you. Do you know what the word Seder stands for? Order, O-R-D-E-R. And the reason that is that the prayers are in a set order. And you'll see that as Rabbi Simon goes through the book with you. And so you're going to find all of these pretty much in the same order in every Haggadah, no matter what Haggadah it is. And the root Seder, S-D-R, the letters are Samach, Daled, Resh, have a root meaning of order. For example, what do you call the prayer book? A Siddur. Seder, Siddur. So anything that's in order, you're going to find that sort of an arrangement. What I'm going to do, because I'm going to be going to the other class, they're studying the immigration law, I'm going to get us started with just a historical note about the Seder. And I think that all of you probably remember, and by the way, I know she's not in here, but she's out there. Many thanks to Sherry for her hard work.
Not only is, because this is by far the most beautiful mock Seder you would ever see, but this is model. Yeah, that's nicer than mock. You're right. Not only, it's by far the most beautiful model Seder you'll ever see, it's up there in one of the most beautiful Seders you'll ever see. So, I don't know if you heard that. But.
Sherry?
Yeah.
Did you hear that?
Did you hear that?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
We just sainted you.
Yeah, but you have to be a martyr for a saint, but no.
I think you were. Okay, number two, this Seder has created a real buzz in the congregation because clearly it's not Passover. And everybody who came by and saw the Seder set up wanted to know why we're celebrating Passover at this time of the year. Number three, you can't do a Seder without your computer in front of you. No, that's a joke. There is a historical note that I did want to share with you that I think is really interesting. It's kind of a sidelight to the Seder. And the only way I could do it and read it to you, because it's out of a book that's sold by Google, was to read it right from the internet. But to give you a background, I know, just to review, that Rabbi Simon told you last week, what was the historical background for the Seder? What did it originate? Not in terms of its early pagan celebrations, but in terms of the history of the period in which it's celebrated. Anybody remember?
The Exodus from Egypt.
Well, the Exodus from Egypt is certainly the core of the story, but there's no Seder described in Torah.
So when we were looking at what was in the Torah versus what wasn't in the Torah, where the different parts of the Seder and the form of the Seder came from.
Yes?
I think it's a tradition, no?
Yeah, a tradition that started from
Trying to emulate
the Roman banquet, exactly. And why would the Jews of this, first century, second century CE, Why would they want to emulate the Roman banquet and retell the story of the Exodus from Egypt? What's the historical motivation?
The model extravagant, meal party.
Well, there is the modeling of the extravagant party that we're free men, but there's something political behind it all. What was the Jewish position historically vis-a-vis the Romans? Were they kissing cousins, good buddies? What was their relationship? How would you describe the relationship between the Romans and the Jews?
Slaves? The same thing, slaves?
Well, I think there is, yeah, the point is that there is an analogy here. Namely, that the Jews felt that they were being oppressed by their Roman overlords. So they saw themselves much as the slaves in the time of Egypt, who felt that they were oppressed by their Egyptian taskmasters and the Pharaoh. So there's a parallel thing going on in this Seder. Yeah, they're celebrating the Exodus from Egypt, but in a coded almost way. What are they also doing? What did our ancestors coming out of Egypt do to Egypt? What did they do? What did they do? They stayed there forever and ever?
They walked away.
They walked away, or they... Yeah, they broke away. They broke away. What, therefore, as you celebrate the Seder, might the Jews be symbolically saying to each other about Rome?
We're getting out of here.
We're getting out of here, exactly. Does everybody see this analogy that's going on here? And I don't think there's any question that the Jews who are celebrating as free people at the Seder, I don't think there's any question but that in their minds, they, in a subplot, were talking about how we're going to get away from Rome and establish once again what? An independent Jewish state. When is the last time they had an independent Jewish state? When? In the Maccabean period, remember? And before when they overwhelmed the Syrian Greeks, and before the Romans came in 63 BCE, until that point they had an independent Jewish state. So this was to fan the flames of their independence once again. Now, that being said, not in this Haggadah that we use, but in Haggahdas, most other Haggadahs, there's a story inside of it. And here's the way it goes. An instance of this is told of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Joshua, Rabbi Eleazar, the son of Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon. At their Seder in a city called Bnei Barak, which is near Jaffa today, they discussed the going out from Egypt through the entire Passover night until their students came and said to them, "Our teachers," meaning guys, "the time has already come to recite the morning Shema." The question is, what was that little meeting about in Bnei Barak? Let me give you some background. There was a Jewish actual revolt against Rome from 132 CE to 135 CE. And the Jews actually tried to revolt, and they were slaughtered terribly. Now, the head of that revolt was none other than Rabbi Akiva, and Bnei Barak was his hometown. What do you think they were talking about all night at the Seder? What do you think they were talking about? Anybody?
Freedom.
Uh-huh. And more specifically?
Their own state again.
Their what?
Their own land again.
Yeah, I think they were plotting the revolt and deciding whether they, the rabbis, ought to get behind the revolt. In other words, it was a clandestine meeting, which was a very unusual Seder, which they used the cover of the Seder in order to hide what they were doing from the Romans. Now, that's what we find in a book written by a number of people, but in this one in particular. And so let me read. If I can figure out, okay. As with most of the material in the Haggadah, this passage contains and probably implies considerably more than meets the eye at first glance. The key to understanding the import of this text may lie in a parallel story, same story, in the classical rabbinical literature, something the Talmud called the Tosefta, which relates that Rabbi Gamliel and the elders who were reclining at a Seder in the house of Bothus ben Sinan in Lod, very nearby, were occupied with discussion of the laws of Passover that entire night until the crowing of the cock. They arose, stirred themselves, and went to the house of study. The parallel and distinctions between these two stories are striking, as may be inferred from the participants in each and the locations where they gathered. Both events took place during the same period. Indeed, some commentators suggest they took place on the same fateful Passover Eve, which would account for the emphasis in both stories on the fact that the sages were engaged in their separate discussions that entire night. In other words, you had one group of rabbis trying to discuss this revolt over here, and another group discussing revolt over there. This, however, is highly improbable if Rabbi Gamliel is assumed actually to have been present at the reported Seder. He most likely passed away 15 years before the fateful occasion that may be alluded to in the story related in the Haggadah. It would be possible to resolve the anachronism if the reference in the story is assumed to be the sage's son, Rabbi Simeon ben Gamliel, rather than the father, the sort of scribal error not uncommon in rabbinic literature. In any case, in this story, the principal actors are the president of the rabbinic high court or Sanhedrin, the elders of the Jew and the elders of the Jewish community. The intriguing question is why the editor chose to include an alternate story in the Haggadah instead of the one describing the Seder conducted by the official leadership of the community, the Judean establishment. After all, both stories deal with an extended discussion of Passover by the sages at a Seder, which was an earlier text. The obvious answer to the question would seem to be that given the editor's orientation, the story related in the Haggadah was selected because the theme of the discussion that lasted all night was the Exodus, whereas the theme of the alternate all-night session was a legal discussion of the laws of the observance of the Passover. You see here now what's happening? However, there are some additional considerations that may bear on the answer as well. If we assume there is a connection between this passage and the one that follows in the Haggadah, the latter may offer an important clue to understanding the import of the text under discussion. In the section, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, who's one of the attendees at the Seder, referred to in the Haggadah, is identified as being 70 years old. It is known from other sources he was born at about the time of the destruction of the temple, 70 CE, and died at about the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135. Accordingly, the Seder referred to in the story may well have taken place at about the time of the revolt. Moreover, we might bear in mind that Rabbi Akiva was one of the guiding spirits behind the revolt. Finally, according to the Talmud, the revolt would seem to have broken out on Passover. It notes that 12,000 pairs of students died between Passover and Shavuot, casualties of the conflict that ensued. Taking these considerations into account, the story of that Seder, which was held at the seat of Rabbi Akiva's academy in Bnei Barak, may be seen as taking on a